Hey guys, tonight we're going to journey far eastward, not to the opulent palaces of emperors or the grand cities of merchants, but to the muddy fields and humble homes of ancient China. We often picture dynasties, intricate philosophies, and magnificent inventions. But for the vast majority of the population, life was a relentless, brutal struggle. Tonight, we're diving into what it sucked to be a farmer in ancient China. And I mean, truly sucked. We're talking about a level of endless toil, hunger, and vulnerability that, frankly, you probably wouldn't survive a single harvest season. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening, drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself transported to a small, unassuming village in ancient China. Perhaps during the Han Dynasty, around 100 CE, the air is thick with the scent of damp earth, wood smoke, and the faint, persistent odor of human and animal waste. You are no longer a modern observer. You are a peasant farmer, a non-fu, the bedrock of imperial China, whose entire existence revolves around wresting sustenance from the land. This isn't a life of scholarly pursuits or military glory. This is land's relentless demands, endless toil. Your farm is not a vast, mechanized expanse. It's a small, often fragmented plot of land, passed down through generations. Much of China's fertile land is concentrated around major river systems. But even there, every inch of arable soil is precious. You gaze out upon your fields, knowing that your family's very survival depends on what you can coax from this stubborn earth. Your life is an unrelenting cycle of agricultural labor, dictated by the seasons. From dawn until dusk, every single day, you are engaged in a physical battle against the elements. Imagine waking before the sun, your body aching from the previous day's relentless work. Your first task is to tend to your few precious animals. A water buffalo for plowing if you're lucky. Perhaps a few pigs or chickens. Then, it's off to the fields. Your tools are rudimentary. Little change for centuries, a heavy wooden plow with an iron share, pulled by a water buffalo or, if you're too poor, by your own strained back. You spend countless hours breaking up the soil, preparing it for planting. In the southern regions, where rice is king, you'd be wading through muddy paddies, planting individual rice shoots by hand, your back perpetually bent, your feet submerged in thick mud. In the north, it's millet or wheat, requiring similar back-breaking effort. Weeding is a constant battle. Without herbicides, you'd spend countless hours hunched over, painstakingly pulling weeds by hand, your fingers raw and stained with earth. The sun beats down on your neck, or the rain soaks you to the bone. But the work never stops. You know that every weed left in the field is a thief, stealing precious nutrients from your crops. Harvest time is a desperate, frantic race. You'd use simple sickles to cut down the grain, or meticulously pick rice stalks by hand. Then comes the threshing, beating the grain with flails to separate the kernels from the chaff. A dusty, exhausting process often performed in crowded communal areas. Every single grain is vital, representing your family's sustenance for the coming months. Imagine the dull, rhythmic thud of the flail, the dust filling your lungs. As you tirelessly work to secure your future, even beyond cultivation, you are responsible for maintaining your home and tools. You'd be repairing mud brick walls, patching leaky roofs, and mending your simple farming implements. There are no machines, no shortcuts, just the brute force of human muscle and the slow, deliberate pace of traditional agriculture. You work until your hands are calloused and bleeding. Your back is screaming, and exhaustion pulls at your very bones. This ceaseless labor is not a choice. It's a profound, unavoidable necessity. Your survival, and the survival of your family, depends entirely on the success of your harvest. A bad crop means hunger, even starvation. So, every waking moment, every ounce of your energy, is dedicated to working the land. The idea of spare time or leisure as we understand it today is almost alien. There's no 8-hour workday, no weekends. The rhythm of your life is dictated by the sun, the seasons, and the unrelenting demands of the imperial state and your local landlord. Your entire family unit is a machine of continuous labor, focused on wresting a meager existence from the land. Your wife is equally busy, spinning cloth, weaving, cooking over a rudimentary stove, preserving food, and raising numerous children. Your children, as soon as they are old enough, contribute to the labor, whether tending animals, gathering firewood, or helping in the fields. It's a collective, constant grind. So, as you watch the sun set over your ancient Chinese village, painting the muddy fields in hues of gold and amber, remember that for the vast majority of its inhabitants, life was a continuous, brutal struggle. There was little energy, little opportunity, and certainly little time for anything resembling modern entertainment. Your life was defined by land's relentless demands, endless toil, a struggle so pervasive it makes your own busiest days seem like a leisurely stroll. It makes you profoundly grateful for modern agriculture and your days off, doesn't it? You've felt the crushing weight of relentless agricultural labor, a life defined by endless toil. But for the ancient Chinese farmer, even after all that backbreaking work, the greatest terror looming over every season was the omnipresent threat of scarcity, feast, or famine, hunger's constant companion. Your entire existence was a desperate year-round battle against starvation, where meager harvests and unpredictable conditions constantly pushed your family to the very brink of survival. Imagine late autumn. The short, intense summer has faded, and the last precious harvest of rice, millet, or wheat has been gathered. You and your family meticulously thresh, dry, and process every single grain, knowing that this small pile of food must sustain you for months until the next growing season. There are no vast granaries filled with surplus for the common farmer, no sophisticated food preservation techniques like widespread canning or refrigeration. Your survival depends entirely on what your small plot of land can provide, supplemented by a few hardy animals. The air is thick with a palpable anxiety, a constant hum of worry about whether there will be enough to last. The problem wasn't just the overall quantity, it was the unpredictability of the harvest. Ancient Chinese agriculture, while advanced for its time, was still incredibly vulnerable to the whims of nature. A sudden, unseasonable drought could bake your fields to dust, leaving your crops withered and stunted. A prolonged, unusually heavy monsoon could cause devastating floods, submerging your rice paddies or washing away your wheat fields, destroying a year's work in an instant. A swarm of locusts, or a sudden outbreak of crop disease, could wipe out your stores. Every year was a gamble, and the stakes were nothing less than your family's very lives. You'd spend sleepless nights listening to the sounds of the wind and rain, or staring up at a cloudless sky, praying for enough water, or not too much, to ripen your crops. As winter truly sets in, the hunger becomes a constant, gnawing companion. Your rations are strictly controlled, carefully measured out day by day. You eat less and less, trying to stretch every grain, every piece of dried vegetable, every scrap of preserved meat. The food is monotonous, often thin porridge, or simple boiled grains, utterly devoid of anything resembling comfort or enjoyment. Imagine the dull, persistent ache in your stomach, the constant feeling of emptiness. Even after a meal, your body, already weakened by hard labor, slowly begins to waste away, your limbs growing thin, your face gaunt. Livestock, precious as they are, also represent a precarious resource. A few pigs, chickens, or a water buffalo might provide occasional meat or milk, but they also require fodder and care, which itself must be cultivated and stored. If fodder supplies ran low during a harsh winter, you face the agonizing decision slaughter of valuable animal early, sacrificing its future potential, or risk it starving. Seeing your precious animals, weakened by winter, Simply collapse and die was another profound blow to your dwindling resources. For supplementary protein, hunting and fishing were common, but these were unpredictable and dangerous endeavors. Forests could be vast and dangerous, filled with wild animals or even bandits. Rivers could flood or freeze. A bad hunting season, or a frozen river, could mean a catastrophic loss of potential food, pushing your family even closer to the brink. You'd spend hours, even days, out in the bitter cold or scorching heat, setting snares or casting nets, often returning empty-handed, the weight of disappointment heavy on your shoulders. The children, especially, suffered during these lean times. Malnutrition was rampant, leading to stunted growth, weakened immune systems, and increased susceptibility to disease. Many children simply didn't survive the brutal winters or periods of famine, succumbing to illness when their bodies were too weak to fight. This grim reality meant that every healthy child was a blessing, and every loss a quiet, agonizing tragedy, often borne with stoic resignation. While detailed demographic records are scarce for early periods, historical accounts and modern archaeological studies of ancient Chinese burial sites often reveal evidence of widespread malnutrition and high rates of child mortality, especially during times of environmental stress or political upheaval. The gnawing hunger permeated every aspect of life. It affected your energy levels, making the already grueling farm work even harder. It affected your mood, fostering irritability and despair. It affected your thoughts, as your mind constantly revolved around the next meal, the next harvest, the next ration. There was no escaping its persistent shadow. The brief periods of plenty, after a good harvest, were moments of immense relief but rarely abundance. They simply meant surviving until the next lean season. The idea of a true surplus, of having enough to truly relax and feel secure, was often a distant dream, reserved only for the wealthiest landlords or the imperial granaries. So, as you imagine the enduring strength of ancient China, remember the vast majority of its people, the farmers who lived with the constant grinding reality of hunger. Their lives were a relentless testament to humanity's struggle against the elements, where survival was a constant triumph, and starvation a perennial threat. It truly makes you feel incredibly grateful for your well-stocked pantry and the stable food supply chains of today, doesn't it? You've explored the relentless struggle against hunger and the omnipresent threat of famine. But for the ancient Chinese farmer, producing even those meager harvests meant a life defined by sheer physical exertion and a constant battle against unpredictable forces. It was an existence of harsh elements nature's unforgiving hand, where devastating floods, prolonged droughts, and extreme weather phenomena could ruin livelihoods and claim lives in an instant. Imagine your farmstead nestled beside a river, or perhaps at the foot of a mountain range. The vast majority of China's population lived on the plains and in the valleys, precisely where the most destructive natural forces often unleash their fury. Your entire life was a gamble against these unpredictable elements, far more powerful than any human effort. The most terrifying and common threat was floods. China's major river systems, the Yellow River Huanghe and the Yangtze River Changjiang, were the lifeblood of agriculture, providing essential water and fertile silt. But they were also China's sorrow. Imagine a prolonged period of heavy rainfall, perhaps during the monsoon season. The rivers would swell, their waters rising inexorably, eventually overflowing their banks. Your carefully tended rice paddies in the south, or your wheat fields in the north, would quickly be submerged under a churning torrent of muddy water. A major flood meant instant ruin. Your entire year's harvest, just weeks or days from being gathered, could be swept away in an instant. Your mud brick home, vulnerable to water, could collapse, leaving your family exposed. Livestock, if not moved to higher ground swiftly, would drown. Imagine the profound despair of watching your entire livelihood, your entire future, literally wash away, knowing there was nothing you could do but flee to higher ground, carrying only what you could salvage to face an uncertain future. These floods weren't rare. They were a recurring, devastating nightmare that reshaped landscapes and lives with terrifying regularity. While precise flood mortality figures are challenging to ascertain for all periods, historical chronicles of Chinese dynasties frequently document devastating floods as major causes of famine and population displacement, highlighting their catastrophic impact on agrarian society. Then there was the opposite extreme droughts. Imagine endless weeks, months even, without a drop of rain. The scorching sun would bake the already parched earth, turning your fertile fields into cracked, dusty deserts. Your precious crops, stunted and withered, would slowly die, shriveling under the relentless heat. The wells would dry up, and the streams would become trickles, forcing you to trek miles just to find enough water for your family and remaining animals. Drought meant slow, agonizing starvation, as your food and water supplies dwindled to nothing. You'd scan the cloudless sky with a desperate hope, praying for a single drop of rain, only to be met with the same relentless, unforgiving sun. Beyond these major disasters, extreme temperatures were a constant challenge. Scorching summers could bring heat stroke and further exacerbate drought conditions. Bitter winters, especially in the north, would freeze the ground solid, making cultivation impossible for months. Without modern heating, staying warm in flimsy homes was a constant struggle. Unseasonal frost could devastate early spring plantings or late autumn harvests. You lived at the mercy of the thermometer and the whims of the wind. Other natural phenomena added to the peril. Locust swarms, appearing seemingly out of nowhere, could descend upon fields, devouring an entire season's crop in a matter of hours, leaving behind utter devastation. Earthquakes, particularly in seismically active regions, could topple homes, rupture irrigation systems, and cause widespread destruction. Adding to the misery, pest infestations, from rats to various insects, constantly threatened stored grain, turning even a good harvest into a losing battle against unseen enemies. The lack of advanced infrastructure and communication meant that natural disasters often brought complete isolation. News of a flood or drought in a neighboring region might take weeks to arrive, and help, if it ever came, would be agonizingly slow. You were largely on your own, relying on your own resilience and the fragile support of your immediate community to survive these cataclysms. The emperor's mandate for a strong harvest offered little comfort when nature itself waged war against your fields. So, as you reflect on the endurance of ancient Chinese civilization, remember the unceasing battle fought by its farmers against the very elements that sustained them. Their lives were a perpetual dance with natural disaster, where harsh elements and nature's unforgiving hand could turn prosperity into famine and hope into despair in a single brutal moment. It truly makes you appreciate weather alerts and national disaster relief, doesn't it? You've faced the raw power of nature's floods and droughts. But for the ancient Chinese farmer, the struggles weren't just against the land, they were also against the relentless demands of a powerful, centralized state. You carried heavy burdens taxes, conscription, corvée, an oppressive array of imperial demands that could strip away your meager surplus and even your freedom, making your life a constant struggle against both nature and the state. Imagine your meager harvest finally gathered, carefully stored in your small granary. Your family has worked tirelessly, enduring hunger and hardship, hoping for a brief respite. But before you can even properly breathe, the imperial demands arrive. The most significant burden was taxation, primarily in the form of grain. A significant portion of your hard-won harvest, perhaps as much as 1/10 to 1/3, would be collected by government officials. Imagine seeing your precious sacks of rice or millet, destined for your family's mouths, being hauled away by imperial agents, leaving you with barely enough to survive the long winter. This wasn't a voluntary contribution. It was a non-negotiable demand, enforced by the full might of the imperial bureaucracy. Failure to pay meant severe punishment, often public flogging, confiscation of your remaining property, or even forced labor. Beyond grain, you might also be required to pay taxes in cloth, silk, or other local products, depending on your region. This meant that even if you didn't produce these items, you had to acquire them. often by trading away precious food. Imagine having to spin extra cloth or raise extra silkworms just to meet the tax quota, further extending your already endless hours of labor. Then came conscription for military service. Imperial China, with its vast borders and constant threats from nomadic tribes or internal rebellions, maintained a large army. You, as a free male peasant, were liable for military service, often for several years. Imagine being abruptly called away from your fields, leaving your family vulnerable and your farm untended. You'd be marched for weeks, sometimes thousands of lieues to distant frontiers or garrison towns. Your training would be harsh, your equipment basic, and your life constantly at risk from battle, disease, or the harsh conditions of frontier life. Many farmers who were conscripted never returned, perishing far from home, leaving their families to grieve and struggle alone. While detailed records for all dynasties are scarce, historical texts from various periods, particularly the Qin and Han, document extensive military conscription of peasants as a fundamental part of imperial defense. Even if you avoided military service, you were almost certainly liable for corvée labor yao yi or gong tian. This was forced labor for the state, a form of taxation paid in sweat and muscle. You might be conscripted for weeks or months each year, abandoning your own fields to work on massive imperial projects. Imagine building roads, canals, palaces, or, most famously, sections of the Great Wall. This work was grueling, often performed in harsh conditions, with primitive tools, under the brutal supervision of imperial overseers. You'd be hauling massive stones, digging endless ditches, or cutting timber, knowing that every ounce of your effort benefited the distant emperor, not your struggling family. The distances involved in corvée labor could be immense. You might be marched hundreds of miles from your home, separated from your family for prolonged periods, with little food and rudimentary shelter. Many perished from exhaustion, disease, or accidents on these grand projects. Their bodies simply left where they fell, unmourned and unrecorded. This forced labor was a direct drain on your physical strength and your family's economic stability. The relentless demands of these burdens meant that even in a good harvest year, your surplus was quickly stripped away. You lived in a constant state of precarity, always on the edge of subsistence. The state, as for all its grand pronouncements of benevolence, was a powerful, often impersonal, entity that saw you primarily as a source of labor and revenue, essential for maintaining its power and glory. This constant pressure from the imperial state left little room for personal advancement or even simple comfort. Your life was dictated by external forces, by the needs of the empire rather than your own family's well-being. The very existence of such a powerful, centralized government, for all its benefits in maintaining order, also came with a profound cost for the millions of farmers who supported it. So, as you reflect on the endurance of ancient Chinese civilization, remember the unseen burdens that weighed heavily on its bedrock. The farmers, for all their vital contributions, carried heavy burdens of taxes, conscription, and corvée, enduring constant demands that drained their resources, their strength, and often their very lives. It makes you profoundly grateful for clear tax codes, professional armies, and the freedom to choose your own labor, doesn't it? You've explored the sheer physical grind and the oppressive imperial burdens that defined a farmer's life. But how did they manage to extract so much from the earth with so little? The answer lies in their relentless effort, coupled with incredibly basic tools, primitive tools, brute force, slow progress. Every farming task, from breaking ground to harvesting, was a monumental physical effort, often using implements that had remained largely unchanged for centuries. Imagine setting out for your fields at dawn. You don't have a roaring tractor or advanced machinery. Your most significant piece of equipment for tilling the soil is the plow, typically a heavy, wooden implement, often with an iron share, the blade that cuts the soil. This plow is pulled by your precious water buffalo, if you're lucky enough to own one. If not, the burden falls to your own back, perhaps hitched to a simple wooden frame, a testament to sheer human muscle power. Imagine the immense effort required to guide this cumbersome tool through tough, often rocky, soil, your shoulders aching with every step, feeling the stubborn resistance of the earth. The plow only scratched the surface, requiring repeated passes to prepare the ground for planting, a slow, arduous dance with the land. For rice cultivation in the south, the labor was even more specialized and physically demanding. You'd be wading through muddy paddies, often knee-deep in water and thick mud, under the relentless sun. The critical task of transplanting rice seedlings was done entirely by hand, one by one. Imagine spending countless hours bent double, meticulously placing each tiny seedling into the mud, your back perpetually aching, your fingers and toes perpetually submerged and pruny. This precise, repetitive work was excruciating, but essential for a good yield. In the northern regions where millet and wheat were staples, the work was equally demanding. Sowing seeds was done by hand, casting precious handfuls of grain across the uneven, freshly prepared ground. Then came the constant battle against weeds. Without herbicides, you'd spend endless hours hunched over, painstakingly pulling weeds by hand or with a simple hoe. Your back would scream in protest, your hands would be raw, and the work would feel utterly ceaseless, as new weeds seemed to sprout faster than you could remove them. Harvest time was a frantic, desperate race against the clock, often before the autumn rains or winter cold set in. You'd use simple sickles to cut down the grain stalks, a rhythmic but physically exhausting motion performed for hours on end. For rice, it was often meticulous handpicking. Every single stalk, every precious kernel, was gathered by hand. Imagine the relentless stooping, the sharp blades near your fingers, the constant fear of losing even a single grain. Then came the threshing, separating the grain from the inedible chaff. This often involved using a flail, two pieces of wood joined by a leather thong, to beat the grain bundles on a hard surface. Imagine the monotonous, back-breaking work of repeatedly swinging the flail, hour after hour, dust filling the air, your muscles burning, as you separated the edible grain from the useless stalks. It was dirty, dusty work, often done in makeshift threshing areas, the rhythmic thud of the flail a constant soundtrack to your life. Even outside the fields, your life was defined by manual effort and rudimentary tools. You'd be hauling water from a communal well or a distant stream using buckets and carrying poles, a heavy and frequent chore. Chopping firewood for cooking and heating was another daily necessity, performed with a heavy axe or a simple saw. Maintaining your mud brick home meant constantly mixing earth and straw, shaping bricks by hand, and patching walls and roofs. These were continuous tasks, requiring strength, perseverance, and often little in the way of sophisticated equipment. Archaeological discoveries of ancient Chinese farm tools consistently show their basic designs, with subtle improvements over centuries but a fundamental reliance on human and animal power. Reinforcing the picture of arduous manual labor, the absence of advanced machinery meant that every individual had to be a jack of all trades. You were not just a farmer, you were a basic carpenter, a rudimentary blacksmith, a herdsman, and a laborer, all rolled into one. Your hands would be permanently calloused, scarred, and often swollen. Your body, though strong, would bear the marks of a lifetime of relentless toil. This reliance on brute force and slow progress meant that productivity was inherently limited. Despite immense effort, the yields were often just enough for subsistence. With little surplus, it locked generations into a continuous cycle of hard labor, leaving little time or energy for education, leisure, or any aspirations beyond mere survival. After a day of endless physical exertion, often from dawn until well after dusk, you'd collapse onto your sleeping mat, utterly exhausted, only to wake and repeat the cycle. So, as you reflect on the ingenuity of ancient Chinese civilization, remember the foundational role of its farmers and the sheer physical effort that underlay their society. Their lives were defined by primitive tools, demanding brute force and achingly slow progress, ensuring that every grain, every harvest, was a monumental triumph of human endurance against the very earth itself. It makes your modern power tools feel like magic, doesn't it? You've explored the sheer physical grind and the oppressive imperial burdens that defined a farmer's life. But how did they manage to extract so much from the earth with so little? The answer lies in their relentless effort, coupled with incredibly basic tools. Primitive tools, brute force, slow progress. Every farming task, from breaking ground to harvesting, was a monumental physical effort, often using implements that had remained largely unchanged for centuries. Imagine setting out for your fields at dawn. You don't have a roaring tractor or advanced machinery. Your most significant piece of equipment for tilling the soil is the plow, typically a heavy wooden implement, often with an iron share, the blade that cuts the soil. This plow is pulled by your precious water buffalo, if you're lucky enough to own one. If not, the burden falls to your own back, perhaps hitched to a simple wooden frame, a testament to sheer human muscle power. Imagine the immense effort required to guide this cumbersome tool through tough, often rocky, soil, your shoulders aching with every step, feeling the stubborn resistance of the earth. The plow only scratched the surface, requiring repeated passes to prepare the ground for planting. A slow, arduous dance with the land. For rice cultivation in the South, the labor was even more specialized and physically demanding. You'd be wading through muddy paddies, often knee-deep in water and thick mud, under the relentless sun. The critical task of transplanting rice seedlings was done entirely by hand, one by one. Imagine spending countless hours bent double, meticulously placing each tiny seedling into the mud, your back perpetually aching, your fingers and toes perpetually submerged and pruny. This precise, repetitive work was excruciating, but essential for a good yield. In the northern regions, where millet and wheat were staples, the work was equally demanding. Sowing seeds was done by hand, casting precious handfuls of grain across the uneven, freshly prepared ground. Then came the constant battle against weeds. Without herbicides, you'd spend endless hours hunched over, painstakingly pulling weeds by hand or with a simple hoe. Your back would scream in protest, your hands would be raw, and the work would feel utterly ceaseless, as new weeds seemed to sprout faster than you could remove them. Harvest time was a frantic, desperate race against the clock. Often before the autumn rains or winter cold set in, you'd use simple sickles to cut down the grain stalks, or meticulously pick rice stalks by hand. For rice, it was often meticulous handpicking. Every single stalk, every precious kernel was gathered by hand. Imagine the relentless stooping, the sharp blades near your fingers, the constant fear of losing even a single grain. Then came the threshing, separating the grain from the inedible chaff. This often involved using a flail, two pieces of wood joined by a leather thong, to beat the grain bundles on a hard surface. Imagine the monotonous, back-breaking work of repeatedly swinging the flail, hour after hour, dust filling the air, your muscles burning, as you separated the edible grain from the useless stalks. It was dirty, dusty work, often done in makeshift threshing areas, the rhythmic thud of the flail a constant soundtrack to your life. Even outside the fields, your life was defined by manual effort and rudimentary tools. You'd be hauling water from a communal well or a distant stream using buckets and carrying poles, a heavy and frequent chore. Chopping firewood for cooking and heating was another daily necessity, performed with a heavy axe or a simple saw. Maintaining your mud brick home meant constantly mixing earth and straw, shaping bricks by hand, and patching walls and roofs. These were continuous tasks, requiring strength, perseverance, and often little in the way of sophisticated equipment. Archaeological discoveries of ancient Chinese farm tools consistently show their basic designs, with subtle improvements over centuries but a fundamental reliance on human and animal power, reinforcing the picture of arduous manual labor. The absence of advanced machinery meant that every individual had to be a jack of all trades. You were not just a farmer, you were a basic carpenter, a rudimentary blacksmith, a herdsman, and a laborer. all rolled into one. Your hands would be permanently calloused, scarred, and often swollen. Your body, though strong, would bear the marks of a lifetime of relentless toil. This reliance on brute force and slow progress meant that productivity was inherently limited. Despite immense effort, the yields were often just enough for subsistence, with little surplus. It locked generations into a continuous cycle of hard labor, leaving little time or energy for education, leisure, or any aspirations beyond mere survival. After a day of endless physical exertion, often from dawn until well after dusk, you'd collapse onto your sleeping mat, utterly exhausted, only to wake and repeat the cycle. So, as you reflect on the ingenuity of ancient Chinese civilization, remember the foundational role of its farmers and the sheer physical effort that underlay their society. Their lives were defined by primitive tools, demanding brute force and achingly slow progress, ensuring that every grain, every harvest, was a monumental triumph of human endurance against the very earth itself. It makes your modern power tools feel like magic, doesn't it? You've explored the sheer physical grind and the constant battle with primitive tools. But for the ancient Chinese farmer, life wasn't just about exhausting labor. It was a perpetual struggle against invisible enemies, disease, and death. Invisible killers. The rampant illnesses, poor hygiene, and complete lack of modern medical care meant that your life was often short, brutal, and tragically cut short by ailments you couldn't even comprehend. Imagine your village. Life is lived in incredibly close proximity humans, their livestock often sharing the same dwelling or courtyard, and their waste. There's no concept of germ theory. You have no understanding that tiny, unseen organisms can cause debilitating sickness and death. Your drinking water comes from a communal well, a nearby stream, or a local pond. This water, crucial for survival, is almost certainly contaminated. Human and animal waste, discarded food scraps, and general refuse would inevitably find their way into these sources, especially after heavy rains or flooding. Imagine drinking from this source daily, completely unaware that you were inviting deadly pathogens into your body. This pervasive lack of sanitation created a perfect breeding ground for disease. Waterborne illnesses like dysentery, cholera, and typhoid would sweep through communities with terrifying regularity. Imagine suffering from severe diarrhea and relentless vomiting, your body racked with pain, rapidly dehydrating. These diseases were particularly fatal for children and the elderly, whose bodies were less able to cope with the rapid fluid loss. You'd witness dozens of your neighbors and family members succumbing to these agonizing ailments, their strength draining away, often leading to death in a matter of days. The very rice water stools of cholera victims would be seen, terrifyingly before your eyes. Then there were respiratory infections, living in crowded, often poorly ventilated mud brick homes, sharing air with dozens of people and sometimes animals, made you incredibly susceptible. Tuberculosis, fei lao, wasting disease, pneumonia, and other fevers would constantly plague the population, exacerbated by exposure to harsh weather during farm work and the pervasive smoke from indoor cooking fires. Imagine the chronic coughs that echoed through your home, the feverish nights, and the slow, agonizing decline of loved ones whose lungs were simply giving out. This white plague silently claimed countless lives across generations. Even seemingly minor injuries or conditions could become life-threatening. A simple cut from a farming tool, a scrape from a rock, or a blister from constant toil could easily become infected. Without antiseptics or antibiotics, a localized infection could rapidly spread, leading to sepsis, blood poisoning, gangrene, or chronic debilitating pain. A farmer might lose a limb to infection, or simply succumb to a generalized blood poisoning. Far from any help. You'd see men with bandaged, foul-smelling wounds, their faces pale with fever, knowing that the infection was slowly consuming them, with no hope for a cure. Parasitic infections were almost universal. Living in close proximity to livestock, often going barefoot, And consuming contaminated food and water meant that intestinal worms and other parasites were an almost constant affliction. While rarely immediately fatal, these parasites would constantly drain your body of nutrients, contributing to chronic fatigue, weakness, and making you more susceptible to other, deadlier diseases. It was a silent internal battle that everyone fought, unknowingly. Childbirth was incredibly dangerous for both mother and infant. Infections during or after delivery were common, and many women succumbed to puerperal fever. Infant and child mortality rates were staggeringly high. You'd likely experience the profound grief of losing multiple children before they reached adulthood. A common tragedy in ancient Chinese families. Archaeological excavations of ancient Chinese burial sites often show a high percentage of infant and child remains, starkly indicating the brutal reality of early childhood mortality rates, often exacerbated by disease and malnutrition. Medical care, when available, was rudimentary. Traditional Chinese medicine had developed sophisticated diagnostic techniques and herbal remedies, but its understanding of infectious diseases was still limited. Physicians, if present in rural areas at all, relied on traditional methods, acupuncture, or herbal concoctions, largely powerless against major epidemics. For the common farmer, access to even basic medical advice was rare. You'd rely on folk remedies, family wisdom, or simply prayer. The widespread lack of personal hygiene further compounded the problem. Infrequent bathing, unwashed clothing, and the constant presence of vermin like rats, mice, lice, and fleas meant that disease vectors were always present. These animals carried pathogens into homes and food stores, completing the grim cycle of contagion. The result of all these factors was a dramatically shortened lifespan. The average life expectancy for an ancient Chinese farmer was tragically low, with many not surviving past their 30s or 40s. While some might live to old age, it was often a testament to immense luck and an incredibly robust constitution. Your life, from beginning to end, was a constant struggle for survival against the invisible killers that surrounded you. So, as you reflect on the endurance of ancient Chinese civilization, remember the silent, unseen enemies that constantly plagued its population. Disease and death, invisible killers, relentlessly stalked every corner of ancient China, turning everyday life into a gamble against debilitating sickness and an early grave. It truly makes you appreciate modern medicine, sanitation, and public health, doesn't it? You face the invisible threats of disease and death, a constant shadow over the ancient Chinese farmer. But beyond the relentless demands of the land and the internal battle against illness, external dangers were also omnipresent: banditry and war. External threats. Your farmstead, seemingly isolated, was perpetually vulnerable to roving gangs, local conflicts, and the devastating ravages of larger imperial wars, turning your life into a precarious dance with violence. Imagine yourself toiling in your fields, far from the nearest town. The vast countryside of ancient China, while productive, was often poorly policed. This created fertile ground for banditry. Roving gangs of desperate men, perhaps dispossessed peasants, disgruntled former soldiers, or simply hardened criminals, preyed on isolated communities. Your small village, with its meager stores of grain and few animals, was a tempting target. You would live in constant fear of their sudden appearance. They might ride in at any moment, demanding food, money, or valuables. Resistance meant swift and brutal violence. Your family could be beaten, your home ransacked, your meager harvest stolen, and even your children or wife potentially taken. Imagine the terror of hearing the distant shouts, seeing the dust cloud on the horizon, knowing that your life's work and your family's safety could be wiped out in an instant by these ruthless outlaws. There was little you could do to defend yourself beyond a few crude farming tools, or the desperate hope that your neighbors would come to your aid. While exact statistics on banditry are impossible to obtain, historical texts and local gazetteers frequently mention bandit activity as a significant threat to rural stability and peasant livelihoods in various Chinese dynasties. beyond mere bandits. Local conflicts were also a constant danger. Villages might engage in feuds over land, water rights, or long-standing grievances, escalating into violent clashes. A powerful local landlord might employ private thugs to enforce his will, seizing land or demanding unfair rents, with little recourse for you. These smaller-scale conflicts, while not full-blown wars, still brought violence and instability directly to your doorstep, turning neighbor against neighbor and making life even more precarious. Then came the truly devastating threat war. Ancient China was almost perpetually in a state of conflict, whether it was internal civil wars between warring factions, imperial expansion, or defense against nomadic invaders from the north. For the common farmer, these grand conflicts were not distant events. They were existential threats that could engulf your entire life. Imagine the sound of distant drums, the sight of marching armies, imperial troops, rebels, or barbarian hordes. Your village that caught between warring factions became a battlefield. Soldiers, often undisciplined and desperate for supplies, would live off the land, meaning they would forage or simply steal your grain, slaughter your animals, and demand lodging. Imagine your fields trampled, your home ransacked, your family terrified by the presence of armed men who saw your possessions as spoils of war. Your family could be caught in the direct line of fire. You might witness your village being razed, your neighbors killed, or your loved ones caught in the crossfire. Even if you survived the initial conflict, the aftermath was often just as brutal. Fields left fallow, irrigation systems destroyed, and the land ravaged, leaving you with nothing to rebuild upon. Conscription was another direct impact of war. As we discussed earlier, male farmers were often forcibly conscripted into the army, marched far from home, and exposed to the horrors of battle, often never returning. This left families without their primary labor, plunging them into even deeper poverty and vulnerability. Even those who remained faced the burden of supplying the army, turning over more of their meager produce or livestock to feed the passing troops. The widespread destruction caused by war led to massive displacement and famine. If your village was destroyed, you became a refugee, forced to wander the land in search of food and shelter, facing starvation and exposure. These were the hidden victims of imperial ambition and conflict, their suffering rarely recorded in the grand histories of dynasties. The economic and social fabric of entire regions could be shattered for decades, ensuring that generations lived with the scars of conflict. So, as you reflect on the enduring strength of ancient Chinese civilization, remember the constant, terrifying shadow that hung over its agrarian heartland. The life of a farmer was not just a battle against nature, it was a perpetual struggle against banditry and war, external threats that could appear without warning, turning your hard-won existence into a nightmare of violence, loss, and profound insecurity. It makes you incredibly grateful for stable governments and peaceful borders, doesn't it? You've witnessed the terrifying realities of banditry and war, external threats that constantly menaced the ancient Chinese farmer. But even when peace reigned and the harvest was good, another, more subtle form of misery defined their existent social stagnation. No upward mobility. The rigid social hierarchy of imperial China largely trapped farmers in a life of endless toil. With little hope of advancement, true wealth, or escape from their predetermined lot, imagine yourself as a Chinese farmer. Generation after generation, your ancestors tilled this same plot of land, suffered the same hardships, and owed the same taxes. Your future, and the future of your children, is almost certainly the same. Imperial China was a deeply stratified society, theoretically based on meritocracy for scholars and officials, but practically divided into rigid classes. The farmer Nong, while theoretically respected as the bedrock of the empire, second only to scholars in the four traditional occupations, scholar, farmer, artisan, merchant, was in reality at the bottom of the social and economic ladder. You were born into your status, and it was incredibly difficult, almost impossible, to escape it. There were very few avenues for upward mobility. Education, The primary path to social advancement in ancient China was through the imperial examination system, which allowed commoners to become scholar officials. However, this required years of rigorous study, access to expensive tutors, and the luxury of not having to work the fields. For a poor farmer's son, dedicating years to study was an unimaginable luxury, as his labor was desperately needed for the family's survival. Imagine dreaming of becoming a scholar, but knowing that every hour spent studying was an hour not spent growing food, a choice that could condemn your family to starvation. This effectively locked out the vast majority of peasant children from the only true path to power and prestige, wealth accumulation. While some farmers might, through immense luck and a series of good harvests, manage to acquire a little more land or a few more animals, true wealth accumulation was incredibly difficult. The constant burden of taxes, the threat of natural disaster, and the demands of corvée labor meant that any surplus was quickly stripped away. Landlords, who often owned the land you worked, extracted significant rents, ensuring you remained in perpetual subsistence. There was little opportunity to invest, to start a business, or to truly break free from the cycle of poverty. Your relationship with the local landlord, often a wealthy, educated scholar gentry family, was a constant reminder of your subordinate position. You might rent the land from them, paying a fixed portion of your harvest as rent, or you might be a tenant farmer, owing labor and services. They held immense power over your life, enforcing their will through local influence and sometimes through private thugs. You lived under their shadow, knowing that a dispute could mean losing your land or even your freedom. The concept of social honor was also structured to keep you in your place. While farmers were praised in imperial rhetoric for their contribution to the state, they were rarely treated with the same deference as scholars or officials. They were seen as uneducated, uncouth, and largely concerned with basic sustenance. Their opinions held little weight in public affairs beyond the village level. Even your daily life was regulated. Sumptuary laws, though not always strictly enforced, might dictate what clothing you could wear, what materials your house could be built from, or what kind of food you could consume, further reinforcing your lower status. You were constantly reminded of your place in the rigid social hierarchy. This social stagnation fostered a sense of resignation and fatalism. Generations lived and died knowing that their lot in life was fixed. While small acts of resistance or individual moments of defiance occurred, the overarching system made large-scale upward mobility a distant, almost mythical dream. The focus became endurance, survival, and perhaps ensuring your children survived to inherit the same plot of land and the same grinding existence. Historians often debate the extent of fluidity within the Chinese social hierarchy, acknowledging a theoretical possibility of upward mobility through examinations, but emphasizing the practical barriers of cost and access to education that fundamentally limited this for the vast majority of peasants. This persistent lack of opportunity for advancement contributed to a pervasive sense of powerlessness. Your life was not your own to shape. It was dictated by the land, by the emperor, by the landlord, and by the immutable social order. You were a vital cog in the imperial machine, but a very small, easily replaced one. So, as you reflect on the enduring structure of ancient Chinese civilization, remember the millions of farmers who lived lives defined by social stagnation. With no upward mobility and a rigid hierarchy, their existence was a relentless cycle of toil and subsistence, with little hope for a better future, a silent testament to the fixed nature of their society. It makes you incredibly grateful for modern concepts of social mobility and personal aspiration, doesn't it? You've explored the relentless toil, the constant hunger, the devastating elements, the heavy imperial burdens, the primitive tools, the invisible killers of disease, the unsanitary dwellings, the pervasive external threats, and the crushing social stagnation. As we conclude our journey into the life of an ancient Chinese farmer, let's reflect on a life of unseen sacrifice, how the enduring strength and magnificence of ancient China were built upon the relentless, often unrecorded, suffering, and indispensable labor of its agrarian backbone. Imagine looking back at your life as an ancient Chinese farmer. What stands out is not glory or fame, but the sheer, unyielding reality of your existence. Your life, for the vast majority, was a testament to survival, a continuous act of endurance against forces far larger than yourself. The most profound legacy of the ancient Chinese farmer is their indispensable contribution to civilization. They were the bedrock. Their tireless labor produced the food that sustained a vast, growing population, the raw materials that fueled its economy, and the very surplus that allowed for the development of complex urban centers. Sophisticated philosophies, magnificent art, and monumental engineering projects like the Great Wall and the Grand Canal. Without their endless toil, the grand narratives of imperial China simply could not exist. They were the silent, unacknowledged foundation of an enduring empire. This leads to the legacy of resilience and endurance. To live a life defined by such constant hardship, natural disasters, oppressive taxes, brutal labor, chronic illness, and the threat of violence, yet to persist, to continue working the land, and to ensure the survival of your family, speaks volumes about the incredible tenacity of the human spirit. Their lives were a continuous battle, and their very existence was a triumph of the will against overwhelming odds. Every generation that survived was a testament to their unwavering determination. However, this legacy is also one of unseen and unrecorded suffering. The vast majority of farmers lived and died anonymously. Their struggles, their pain, their individual stories of loss and endurance were rarely captured in the official histories, which focused on emperors, generals, and scholars. Their contributions were taken for granted, their misery largely ignored by the elite who benefited from their labor. The Great Wall stands as a testament to imperial ambition, but also to the countless unnamed farmers who perished building it. Their sacrifices often literally buried beneath the very structures they created. The unique combination of a highly centralized, bureaucratic state and a largely agrarian population created a specific system of control and extraction. The imperial state, with its complex tax systems, conscription, and corvée labor, exerted immense pressure on the farmers, viewing them primarily as a source of revenue and manpower. This top-down control ensured that any surplus was siphoned off, perpetuating a cycle of subsistence that left little room for accumulation or advancement for the majority. Finally, the life of an ancient Chinese farmer is a powerful reminder of the profound gap between the idealized image and the harsh reality. While imperial rhetoric often praised the farmer as the root of the nation, their actual lives were often miserable, fraught with danger, and devoid of the comforts and opportunities available to the elite. It serves as a sobering counterpoint to the romanticized visions of ancient civilizations, grounding our understanding in the lived experiences of the common people. So, as you reflect on the majestic achievements and long history of ancient China, look beyond the grand narratives and remember the millions of individuals who lived lives of unseen sacrifice. Their story, a testament to relentless toil, enduring hardship, and profound resilience, is woven into the very fabric of Chinese civilization. It reminds us that behind every great empire lies the unacknowledged and often miserable reality of those who built it. One grain, one furrow, one backbreaking day at a time. All right, as the last echoes of our journey through the tough life of an ancient Chinese farmer fade into the quiet of the night, it's time to gently bring our minds back to the present. You've walked through their muddy fields, felt the weight of their burdens, and grappled with the profound realities of their endless toil. It's a powerful reminder that history, in its quietest corners, often reveals the most poignant truths about human resilience and the enduring spirit of survival. Let the images of endless fields, failed harvests, and endless burdens fade away, giving way to the quiet peace that surrounds you. The smell of damp earth and the tense atmosphere of uncertainty fade, giving way to the familiar comfort of your own space. Let the wandering thoughts of natural disasters and imperial oppression drift away, replaced by a sense of ease and calm. The silent struggles and sacrifices of the peasants of yesteryear are now, temporarily, part of your understanding, enriching your sense of history, the value of labor, of resilience. As your breathing deepens and your body relaxes, know that the stories of the past are always here, patiently waiting to be rediscovered whenever you seek a gentle escape into the depths of time. But now, the journey is complete. Rest in peace, knowing that another story has been revealed. Gently, just for you.